Today we want to talk about a new topic, investing in single-family housing. Okay. In this topic, we have three sections. We have three main ideas we want to talk about. The first is we want to talk about the determinants of home price appreciation. That would be the set of the variables that have impact on home values. The second section would be no arbitrage theory. Try to relate the home value to the rent price. And we try to have some sort of theory to understand the relationship between rent that we will need to pay in order to stay in a home, a house, versus the cost of buying a home. Okay, so that would be the second section. And the third one, we wanted to look into an application. We wanted to articulate our second main idea about that theory, that no arbitrage theory. Next slide. Buying a home is a very important decision and also a very popular decision for a typical American household. And in the United States, our home ownership is about 70%. That means that 70% of a household own a home, and we have about 30% of a household that rent a home. And in some Asian country that they value home ownership even more, their home ownership percentage could be even higher than 70%. But by international standard, our 70% in the United States is fairly high already. And there are a lot of politicians that they, historically speaking, encourage home ownership. They believe that promote home value and bring in a lot of social good to the society. And to some degree that is true, but at the same time, if we promote the home ownership too aggressively, sometimes we get into trouble. And one of the reasons for 2008 financial crisis was that at that time that there were some households they were not supposed to own a home because they do not have that financial means, and they are being encouraged to own a home by the entire system, political system, financial system, and then eventually that they got into trouble and could not afford to pay their mortgage payment. And they lost everything on the home, and so that's kind of very sad outcome, and so home ownership is a very tricky notion. That it seems that there is an optimal point for any society. Too much of home ownership may not be a good thing, and too little of home ownership is not ideal either. Next slide. So is investing in a home from a typical household's perspective a good idea? Okay, so we can look at from two different perspectives. From a financial perspective, if we ignore the financial leverage, that means that the use of the debt, the use of the mortgage to buy the home. If we're just talking about we use 100% of our own saving to buy a home, that would be the 100% equity purchase. Then what kind of rate of return to this kind of 100% equity investing? Let's say that you put into $300,000 of your own saving buying your first home. And what kind of rate of return each year that you'll be able to generate for this $330,000 that you put into? It turns out that over the past 100 years in the United States, that rate of return is about only 3%. 3% each year. So you earn 3% on that $300,000 purchase. If you put all of your $300,000 into this purchase without borrowing any money, your rate of return is only 3%. During the same 100 years, the rate of return on T-bill, that means that the rate of return that you'll be able to earn by lending your money to Uncle Sam is higher than 3%. And we know that the T-bill, T-note rate that is risk-free. I mean that you don't need to bear any kind of risk, and you'll be able to earn more than 3%, while you bear risk to buy a home, you only earn 3%, which is lower. And that doesn't make too much sense. So financially speaking, buying a home probably is not the best idea from a long-term perspective. Of course, from time to time, you have certain number of years that you do see a large amount of appreciation on home, but that is relatively abnormal from a long-term perspective. And how about emotionally? Because sometimes we make a purchase not just because that you earn probability on it. You make a purchase because you feel happy, you feel great about that, and that is what the essence of living in this society, to maximize your happiness. And we have not too many research, but we do have some research some kind of promote home ownership, some even against home ownership. So we do not have a consensus in this particular regards. And for example, there was a paper published by a Wharton researcher way back about 10 years ago, and look into the city of Columbus, Ohio. That's where Ohio State University is located. And look into, make a comparison among those households that own the home versus another set of households that rent a home, and look at their outcome. And that research have found is that for the set of the household that purchase a home, it appears that they become something like the slave of the home, in the sense that they will need to mow the lawn, and during the weekend they cannot go out, enjoy active lifestyle, and they become fatter and has, for example, more heart attacks, something along that line. On the other hand, for the other set of households that rent a home, and they seem to be happier, they seem to be healthier, and maintain more active lifestyle instead of just mowing the lawn and be constrained by this home ownership. And of course, this is just one research, and we do not have the conclusion, but I just want to use this one particular journal article to highlight that whether owning a home will lead to a greater amount of happiness. I think it is an open question, and we probably don't have a good answer to that question at this moment. Okay. Next slide. Home value appreciation or depreciation is highly depends on location, and location, as we mentioned quite many times. And location is related to the study of urban economics that we have talked about already. And so it's highly contingent upon which city that we talk about here. There are some cities over the past, for example, 20-30 years have seen very good housing price appreciation, but at the same time there are certain cities that have been done really well over the same 20-30 years. For example, in the past 20-30 years, if you look at the housing price of let's say San Francisco, Houston, San Diego, over the past 20-30 years, housing price have been coming up quite nicely. But if you look at a city like Detroit, Rochester, New York, then the housing price performance has not been that great. Okay, and that has something to do with the so-called economic base, or the exporting capacity and ability of those cities. So that's a kind of the so-called demand side issue that we study in urban economics. Okay, that will be next slide. Okay, and now let's move on to, let's talk about the known determinants of the home appreciation or depreciation here. I list 5 factors. Those are the 5 well-known factors that drive home prices. And the first one is a population growth, and this is no-brainer. You know, when you have more people living in one city, then you have a greater need for the space, and therefore the home prices goes up. Okay, so the population. And in the United States, that we all know that for those cities that are located in the so-called Sun Belt, you can count like from Florida, Texas, all the way to California. This is the Sun Belt. Over the past few decades, that we have seen the growth of the population. On the other hand, along the Snow Belt, the Rusty Belt in the north, that we have seen a much smaller amount of the population growth. Therefore, the housing prices in the north, we tend to see fewer appreciation, less appreciation. So population growth is something that we need to pay attention. And how about for Vermont? Okay, the state of Vermont as a whole, that we have a pretty flat population as a state. We do not see too much going on in terms of the population growth or population decrease. But in the Chittenden County, where our university is located, we do see moderate increase in population over the past 20-30 years. And that would imply that the rural Vermont over the past 20-30 years have experienced a decrease in population. Okay. So the home price, the home value in terms of appreciation in Chittenden County over the past 20-30 years have been all right, not too bad at all, and kind of going up moderately as time goes by. But on the other hand, those property in rural Vermont that their performance are probably less than the CPI, that would be the inflation rate for some of those villages out there. The second determinant of the appreciation is the employment. So you need to have job in order to be able to afford the mortgage, in order to buy a home. So it's not just about the increase in population, but also we want to see the improvement in employment rate. Okay, and at this particular moment, our economy is suffering, and there are a lot of services type of job that the employee have been let go, etc. So at this moment, that we do see a lot of downward pressure from the employment side onto the home prices. Okay, so today's home market is probably much weaker than the home market just 3 weeks ago. Just 3 weeks ago when we met the last time in the classroom. Okay, because in the past 3 weeks that we have seen some of the people losing their job because of this corona situation. The third determinant of appreciation is the household income. Okay, if the kind of job that offer in one particular city are all extremely low pay, then they cannot afford to buy the houses. So here we're talking about population increase. They will need to have job employment, and the kind of job need to be the kind of reasonable, livable kind of wage or above livable wage in order to actually add to the demand for the home buying. The fourth one is interest rate. Interest rate is a cost of buying a home when someone will need to apply for a mortgage. So in general, okay, here the sign, if you look at the sign in the slide, that the interest rate is associated with a negative sign. And it means that when the interest rate is low, and we will see that more demand for the home buying, and that's going to drive out home value. Okay, and because by having a lower mortgage rate, then the monthly mortgage payment will be lower. And along this particular video, there will be a news article that I will send alone, and please study that particular news article. And in that news article, we talk about the current mortgage rate situation, And in general, mortgage rate, that would be the interest rate that we're talking about here, is the sum of a risk-free rate plus a spread, or the so-called risk premium. And this particular moment, okay, the risk-free rate coming down because the Federal Reserve pushed down the interest rate. But the risk premium, the spread, going up. So they kind of cancel out. And when they add together, our current mortgage rate actually does not really drop to the level that many people would expect, just because the spread goes up. And the spread is used by the lender to compensate for the lending risk, the underwriting risk. And this particular moment that those banks that issue a mortgage, they are facing a lot of underwriting risk, for a reason that if you provide a loan to a potential home buyer, there's a high risk that associated with this particular home buyer may lost the job and not being able to pay back the monthly payment. Therefore, this purchase would become a foreclosure. And that's a risk that the lender think about it very carefully. As a result, that the mortgage could not coming down because this risk component is quite substantial. And this uncertain time, and we are not quite sure how long this entire epidemic, pandemic that is going to last. And that is uncertainty that a lot of businesses, including the mortgage lending, will need to think about. And the last determinant is the cost of the renting housing. Okay, so that would be the rent. Okay, and historically speaking, we have a positive correlation between rent and the home price. When the rent is high, we tend to see home price is high, and vice versa. When we see the home price goes up, the rent tend to goes up. And here, a lot of people think about the notion of so-called causality. That means what lead to what? Is a rent, is an increase in rent lead to the increase in the housing price, or the increase in housing prices lead to the increase in rent? It turns out that this causality is both ways. They both impact. They both impact on one and each other. Okay, and so sometimes it's very difficult to disentangle in terms of the direction of causality. These two things is like the two different sides of the same coin. Okay, so you can think of something like that. Next slide. So this is a supply side that I just mentioned earlier about the economic base. Okay, and economic base is about the location quotient that we learn about in the first half of semester, and that would be what kind of export, what kind of services and product that this particular city would be able to export outside of this particular city. And this driving force, this core industry, are the focus of our research when we want to invest in housing. For example, for the city of Burlington that we talk about, that there are two main core industry. One is education. We have quite many colleges in our city, in our town. And also the hospital, the healthcare system is a very important industry. So if we want to think about whether the home in Burlington has potential for appreciation, we must study education industry, we must study healthcare industry very carefully in the city of Burlington and address and investigating the potential of these two industries. And if we see they have a further potential for growth, then no, it would lead to a much greater potential for the home appreciation for this particular city. So that would be the economic, that would be supply, that would be demand side coming from the economic based kind of the analysis. Next slide. And in addition to the demand for the space, there is another factor that had not been talked about in the housing market literature, is about the monetary effect. And sometimes we use the word asset bubble. Asset bubble could be created when we have too much of a liquidity, when we have too much of money supply that have been concentrated in this particular type of asset. For example, in year 2008 financial crisis that leading to this crisis, a few years before that, people are making an argument that our monetary policy at that time from the Federal Reserve was too loose. That means that we have too much of the money floating in our system, and those money need to go somewhere. And a lot of them park their money in real estate, driving up the prices of real estate, and eventually lead to the asset bubble, and then the collapse of the housing market, and lead to financial crisis. And that is one example. And another example that I have in this particular slide is to look into the money stock. And in this here particularly, we're talking about in China. China's money stock is close to 30% of the global money stock. Okay, so about 30%. But the size of the economy in China is only about 10 to 15% of the global economy. So given 10 to 15% size of economy, the amount of money is almost 30%. That just means that the money supply is just way too much in China, and that as a result that there is a huge asset bubble in the form of the housing bubble in China, and that creates a lot of pressure for the Chinese authority in terms of trying to maintain those high real estate prices at currently very high level. They do not want to see a further appreciation of housing, but they would not tolerate the housing to coming down, because if there is a great depreciation of housing in China, that will lead to the collapse of the financial system in China. Okay, so this is a challenge that the Chinese authority will need to deal with right now in China. Okay, let's wait and see how this will go. Next slide. And about the speculation, in addition to the monetary policy that we just talked about, and here is there are certain elements of the government policy also play a very important role. For example, property tax. Okay, property tax is later we will learn about this. Property tax is a very important part of the cost of the owning a home. Property tax needs to be paid at least once a year in this country, and the longer that you own a property, the more property tax that you need to pay. So it's the so-called carrying cost. This is a carrying cost. When you own this particular property, this particular asset, you will need to pay a fee for doing so. Okay, so this is what we call that the carrying cost. And carrying cost it's a fundamental cost of owning a home. Later we will study about this component. And in general, the greater amount of the property tax, then the housing prices would tend not to go up that much. And in the United States, because we have, particularly in the state of Vermont, we will pay about almost 2% of the property value as the property tax each year. So a lot of people will not want to speculate on the housing property in the state of Vermont, because each year 2%. If you own that for 2 years, you need to pay 4%. If you own that for 3 years, you need to pay 6%, regardless whether you make money or not. But that's not the case in China. In China, the majority of the city do not have the property tax. When you don't have a property tax, of course, that leads to a greater amount of speculation, just like the China is currently deal with. Next slide. Okay. In Hong Kong, when housing prices become too great, this is a so-called cage house in Hong Kong. As you can see that and 3.5% of the Hong Kong resident can only afford to live in those steel cage. And how much the rent that they only pay for that little bit like a bunk bed, $250 per month. That's a lot of rent for such a small space, and you live with so many people together as if you were like an animal. And that is a downside of when the housing prices are so unaffordable. Okay. Next slide. And we study real estate urban economics, not just from the supply side. We also we're not just from the demand side. We also study them from the supply side. And in general, supply side is not that important, relatively speaking, compared with demand side. From a long-term perspective, the value of the home is driven by demand. And the supply side plays a certain role, but it's a secondary role. Okay, so this is something I want to emphasize. On the supply side, for example, the cost of the land. There are certain kind of area where the supply of the land is just impossible. For example, Manhattan. Manhattan is almost like a peninsula. Okay, and it's almost impossible for you to increase the land for Manhattan. On the other hand, the cost of the land is much more affordable in Los Angeles, just because the basin of the Los Angeles is so great. They can keep on expanding toward the east into the desert. So the amount of the potential for expanding the size of city for Los Angeles versus Manhattan are totally different. That lead to the housing prices in Los Angeles versus Manhattan lead to quite different kind of direction. Of course, Los Angeles is not cheap, but nowhere near the Manhattan. And that's one of the reasons, because of the supply side from a long-term perspective. There are certain cities that are especially expensive for the kind of the wage that a typical resident would be able to earn in that city. For example, Honolulu. Honolulu, the housing price have been very expensive because it's a small island, and if you have a typical job in Honolulu, you won't be able to make a whole lot, because almost a lot of those kind of jobs are relatively straightforward kind of job. For example, working in the retail industry, etc. Okay, so because it's a sea lock. Okay, and there are cities that call the so-called landlocked, like Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff is basically a small city surrounded by the federal forest. So if you wanted to escape the relatively high prices of Flagstaff, you will need to travel outside of this city, pass through federal forest for another 10 miles. Then you will be able to find the other smaller city where the cost will be cheaper. But you need to travel at least 10 miles each day, one way. So that's one example of the so-called landlocked. And those we tend to see those kind of city, either sea locked or landlocked, to have higher land prices. And also cost of labor. The cost of labor as time goes by goes up, because the CPI tend to be positive as time goes by. And we do need people to build the home. So when the construction workers salaries goes up, the wage goes up, that we see the housing price as time goes by tend to goes up to reflect that cost component. And same thing applied to the material like timber. Okay, timber as time goes by become more and more expensive. Therefore, when you buy a new home, the home prices tend to goes up to reflecting part of that inflation. And sometimes we also have the development restriction, okay, like the one we talk about in Arizona, that you will need to have 100 years of water right before you'll be able to develop a subdivision. That's a supply side consideration. Next slide. And there are also sub-market factors within a city. Okay, maybe there is a certain area within the city that we see more appreciation than the other part of the same city. And one example, okay, that is in Manhattan, there is a West Chelsea zoning proposal that was passed in the year 2005. And of course, in recent years, that if you went to Chelsea, in Manhattan, you will notice that there was a lot of construction there because of this rezoning. Rezoning means that allow for new development, the ease of the commercial development. So now we have a nice shopping mall in that region. We have Google, Facebook, they put their headquarters within this new subdivision. There will be new hotel in line in the next few years. And so it's a redeveloped, booming region of the Manhattan. The property value in this rezoning district have been waiting up like crazy over the past 5 to 10 years. So this is one example of the submarket factor. When we have rezoning, allow for a better, a more efficient use of the space, the housing prices and property prices that tend to go up along with it. And the next slide. So now we want to move on to our second section. We want to talk about this no arbitrage pricing relationship between owning a home versus renting a home. And unlike in stock investing we have the so-called equilibrium SA pricing model, such as the CAPM. In the CAPM we build a beautiful equilibrium model. And in real estate, we don't have such a model. And the reason is that a property is a unique product. Just a property across the street may have a different value. So we just could not pull all of those individual property into a nice equilibrium model to solve for the asset pricing equation. We just don't have that. So here the best thing we can have is a so-called no arbitrage argument. And this no arbitrage argument say that in the long run, not in the short run, okay? Because we understand that if you want to do arbitrage, you need to involve the arbitrage. And arbitrage involving buy and sell stock, and buy and sell property involving a lot of transaction cost. Because transaction cost is so high in the housing market, easily 5%, 6%. Okay, so it's very hard to actually do the arbitrage. Only if two things, the prices deviate by too much, then we start to see the correspondent action of a buy and sell to bring the prices back to more some sort of in line with some sort of theoretical relationship. But you need that deviation to be great in order to justify the great amount of transaction cost. So we can say that in the long run they need to come back, but in the short run probably it won't, because if in the short run the deviation is only moderate, then no one is going to do the arbitrage. So the so-called no arbitrage argument try to equate the cost of owning a home and the cost of renting a home is a long-term argument. And we do not expect that this relationship will be whole at any given time. It's just unlikely, okay? But it gives us some perspective. Although it's not entirely useful to make short-term prediction, but it does give us perspective about whether the home price right now is too high or too low from a fundamental perspective. If it's too high, we know that it could be even higher, but it could not get too high and for too long, and eventually you come back. Okay, so you know about that whether from fundamental perspective, whether the home price is too high or too low, although it says very little about the prices movement down the road. And we cannot use this particular theory or this particular tool to make prediction for the near term. That would be the limitation of this theory, but still very useful. We can understand through this theory. We can understand that whether the home price at this moment is on a pricey side or the less pricey side. So that gives us some information. Next slide. Okay. First, let's take a look. What kind of cost a homeowner will need to pay each year? Here we're talking about the cost per year when they own a home. Okay. The idea here is that this no arbitrage argument say that regardless whether you buy a home or whether you rent a home, you are enjoying this home, this space. So the cost of owning a home from a long-term perspective should be equal to the cost of renting this home because they give you the same amount of happiness. But in order to equate these two components, we will need to look into the cost of owning a home, exactly what kind of item within this particular group of cost. So here we kind of break down. Okay, the first one is the opportunity cost. What does it mean by opportunity cost? Opportunity cost means that when I own a home, I will need to put my money into this home. Whereas when I rent a home, I don't need to spend so much of the money to actually buy a home. I just pay the monthly rent, that's it. So the large amount of money I will put in to buy a home, when I put this part of money into buying a home, I lost the opportunity to invest this part of money, say, into stock, or lend that to Uncle Sam to earn risk-free rate, etc. So that's opportunity cost. Okay, you kind of forego the second best use of this part of money. And here, a conservative measure for the opportunity cost would be P times RF. The P is the home value, RF is risk-free rate. So here we're talking about the amount of interest that you would be able to earn, okay, and you have forgone this amount of interest payment when you buy a home instead of lending the money to Uncle Sam to earn risk-free interest, okay. So this amount is the amount of interest that you won't be able to earn if you put your home purchase money into lending to Uncle Sam instead of actually buying a home. So this is the opportunity cost. The second component of the cost of ownership is the property tax. When we own a home, we will need to pay property tax. When we rent a home, we don't need to pay the property tax. So here we have this unique cost associated with owning a home, and that would be P times W, and here the W is the property tax rate. Okay, so property tax rate times the home value, we have the cost of the property tax each year. The third component is the tax deductibility. Okay, and before the tax overhaul occurred 2 years ago, and the interest payment of the mortgage is tax deductible. So it means that when you own a home, when you pay the interest payment for your mortgage, and you can deduct, you can pay less amount of the federal income tax to Uncle Sam. So there's a benefit. That's the reason why here I have a negative sign there. Okay, because it's a benefit, so in terms of cost, it's a negative cost. Okay, so it would be P times lambda time Rm plus W, and Rm is the mortgage rate, the interest rate that you will need to pay, and the W, okay, is the property tax, because property tax also is tax deductible, okay, at least for some resident. And here I put also a question mark, say that question mark under the new tax law. And the reason is that right now, later we have in the next slide. Okay, in the next slide, okay, it said that under the new tax law, and we have the so-called SALT, SALT tax, that the new law bundle all of the so-called SALT tax together and limit the deduction in total to $10,000 for both individual and married couple. Okay, so here we're talking about that for a lot of the homeowners, particularly living like a state of the New York or California, where that they earn more money, they pay more of the state income tax, and because their state income tax for many households easily exceed $10,000, so they cannot use the mortgage interest expenditure and other kind of expenditure to write down their tax liability. Okay, so they are being capped at $10,000 for their state income tax and the sales tax, and also the mortgage interest payment combined together. So actually, for many residents in those high state income tax rate state, they do not have this federal tax deductibility anymore. And that's the reason why in the previous slide, okay, I put a question mark there. The fourth one is maintenance. That's a depreciation. When we purchase a home and when we live inside the home, as time goes by, the physical quality of the home is going to depreciate. And we will need to put into additional capital improvement to bring back, to maintain the living space. For example, every 10 years I may need to have people come in to fix the window because the window start to leak. Maybe every 20, 30 years I will need to replace the roof. That all involve the cost because I own this home, I will need to put into maintenance cost. On the other hand, when I rent a house, I don't need to because the home is owned by the landlord. Landlord will taking care of those kind of things. And the depreciation here is P times delta. And the delta is the percentage of the home value each year you will need to continue to spend in order to maintain this particular property. Okay, and this delta in general is about 2%. It's about 2% in the United States for a typical construction of the home. So on average, as time goes by, you put into 2% of the home value to maintain your home in order to sustain the value of a home. On the other hand, if you put into less than 2% of the maintenance expenditure, then the overall quality of the home as time goes by, then it's going to coming down, and that eventually erode the home value. The fifth one is the expected capital gain appreciation, P times G. G is a percentage of a home appreciation or depreciation. So G can be positive or negative. And this is a negative sign because appreciation is a good thing. Okay, let's say that I will need to pay the property tax as a cost, but if my property value goes up, and then I have much more net worth. So here, this appreciation is from the perspective that when you own an asset, okay, you do have a carrying cost, but at the same time, you have a potential for appreciation and depreciation. And that is part of your cost of owning. And when you have a depreciation, when you have appreciation, and you have a negative sign associated with this appreciation, you basically effectively reduce your cost of ownership. And when you have a depreciation, then you increase the cost of ownership. The sixth one is additional risk premium to compensate the homeowner. Okay, and this means that when we own a home, we will need to put into a lot of money, our own money, into buying this particular home. And this involves risk. And we know that when you bear more risk, there need to be a risk premium associated with it. On the other hand, when you rent a home, you don't need to put into so much of the money. Then you does not need to incur this kind of risk premium. Okay, so we do have risk premium we need to address. So we have these 6 components. We add them all together. Next slide. That will be another. That will be the 4th slide down the road. We add them all together. The title of this particular slide, this slide number 19, you say the cost of ownership. 3. The annual dollar cost of ownership equal to P times RT plus P times W. And then we minus the entire thing with a question mark. Okay, that would be the P times lambda times RM plus RW, because nowadays there are a lot of households they could not enjoy this tax deductibility anymore under the new tax law, plus P times delta minus P times G plus P times lambda. Okay, so we have this annual cost, dollar cost of the ownership. And if you look at, we have 6 terms here. And each term has a P in front of that. So we can factor out the P. And when we delete all of those P, then at the bottom of this slide, we have user cost. Okay, so now we call that user cost. User cost is a percentage. It's RF plus W minus question mark lambda times Rm plus W times delta minus G plus gamma. Okay, so we have this user cost. User cost is a percentage. That means that when we own a property, each year we will need to incur user cost, this particular percentage of the cost when we own a home. And we compare this user cost, this percentage, with the cost of renting a home. That will be the next slide. The cost of renting in terms of the annual dollar renting cost, this R, uppercase R, equal to P times lowercase r. And that lowercase r, okay, is a rent rate. So we compare rent rate, this lowercase r, with the slide above. Okay, the previous slide, that would be the user cost. So we compare user cost and the rental rate. When the user cost is relatively high, the rental rate is relatively little, we say that owning a home is too expensive. That means that the home price is too high. It's not attractive. Then therefore we need to rent a home instead of owning a home. Okay? Let me say this one more time. When user cost is relatively high, while the rental rate is relatively low, we say that owning a home is too expensive. It's not attractive. Therefore, the optimal decision is to rent a home instead of buying a home. And if enough people see this relationship, it will mean that the home prices will need to drop. Okay? And the rent will goes up such that these two costs would largely equal to bring into the so-called no arbitrage relationship. So by comparing the cost of owning a home and the cost of renting a home, we'll be able to say something about the valuation of a property. And that's the reason why we study this particular relationship, this particular no arbitrage argument. And earlier skip 3 slides. Let's go back there, complete those 3 slides. And we have a new tax law. Just talk about that. Next slide. The tax and the real estate prices. Okay, when President Trump announced the new tax law way back year 2018, what we have found is that the total sales in Manhattan fell 70% in the second quarter of 2018 compared with the same period years ago, and the average sale price fell 5%, okay, to $2.1 million, and reflecting this unfavorable tax overhaul for those states, the property in those states where they have a high state tax rate, income tax rate. Okay, so that's the implication from that particular tax overhaul. And in China, they're talking about the possibility they want to impose new property tax because at this moment they don't have property tax. And so this is the information I retrieved from NY New York Times talking about this potential tax law. Okay, you can read this part. And let's go to slide number 21. Okay, so let's summarize what we have learned so far on this no arbitrage theory. This no arbitrage theory says that from a long-term perspective, the annual dollar cost of renting cost will need to close to or equal to annual dollar cost of owning. And the left-hand side would be P times R, that's uppercase R. That's the amount of the dollar of rent we pay each year for enjoying this home. And the right-hand side, we have the sixth component of the dollar cost of owning a home, and from a long run they need to be equal. Okay, and then the equation, okay, at the bottom is from by using percentage instead of the dollar amount. The left-hand side of the equation is a lowercase r, that's rental rate. The right-hand side of the equation, RF plus W minus question mark lambda time Rn plus W time delta minus G plus gamma. This right-hand side is a sort of user cost. The user cost is in percentage. And the lower the user cost, that will be the lower the right-hand side of that equation, then the higher the price of the rent to ratio. And it means that when the user cost is low, okay, and it just means that the rent is relatively small, and then the price is relatively high, and we have a higher price to rent ratio. Okay, so that I think we'll leave the last point of this information to the next lecture. We still have about a half of the thing in this topic left, and next time when we come back, we will continue to look into this upcharge relationship. We are going to put into some numerical number so that the thing that you learn about this theory will become clear. At this moment, you might get some of that, you might not be able to get all of it. It's okay, because next time when we come back, when we plug in number, then the whole thing will become clear. Okay, this is for today. Thank you.